This
Okay.
conference will now be recorded.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to Simran for agreeing to present for us. Today we have Simran, who's been doing an internship with Geo-Energie Suisse, and she'll be talking about geothermal energy research in the Bedretto Underground Lab. So I'm very excited to hear what's been going on underground.
Thank you very much. So welcome everyone to my presentation on, again, geothermal energy in the Bedretto Underground Lab. And I'll start with a bit of a content. So first I'll just go over a bit of my background on how as a geology student I got into geothermal energy, and then go on to talking about the Bedretto Underground Lab and Geo-Energie Suisse, and then what I did during my internship and the overall experience that I had and the lessons hopefully I learned. So from my background, I started in 2016 with a bachelor's in earth sciences at UCL, and at UCL I went to quite a few conferences and talks on like sustainable energy, and I realized that geothermal energy was something that was new and well upcoming, and I realized that even some oil companies were actually presenting on exploration in some crazy locations in India and especially in the Himalayas, and that got me really interested. And so when it came to choosing my master program, I didn't want to do something oriented in petroleum because it wasn't my passion. I wanted to do something that was a bit more applied, so engineering geology was kind of the straight answer for me. And I realized that there was a really good course at ETH Zurich in Switzerland, and I was recommended to go. And of course, the alpine geology was kind of a draw for me, so I decided to take the ride, and it was a good idea. I got the opportunity to work in Geo-Energie Suisse, which is the Swiss governmental geothermal energy research company. And I completed my internship from September 2020 to January 2021. And now I'm currently working on my master thesis. What I realized about ETH Zurich was that there was quite a lot of geothermal energy research taking place. There is even just a specific research group dedicated to geothermal energy. It's called GEG, Geothermal Energy and Geofluids, chaired by Professor Martin Osar. And again, like this really got me interested with the research going on. And talking about research, we can look at the Bedretto Underground Lab now. So Bedretto is located in the Central Alpine Alps. It's specifically located here, which is part of the Gotthard Massif. And as you can see from the close-up, the red line indicates the Bedretto Tunnel, and this was originally an access tunnel to the Furka Tunnel, which is a passenger and freight tunnel that connects to alpine villages under the mountains, or going under the mountains. And the Bedretto Tunnel is around 5 kilometers in length, and what occurs there is hydraulic stimulation experiments at a scale of 300 to 400 meters in depth, again, borehole depth. And the scale is closer to what the geothermal reservoir would be compared to other underground labs that had previously been in use, such as the Grimsel Underground Lab that stopped, that officially ended in 2020. And this is a cross-section of Bedretto Lab, and you can see that the geology is crystalline Rotondo granite, which is highly metamorphosed, and the faults often have quite distinct shear zones. And you can see that the overburden is around 1.5 kilometers at the most. And this leads me to Geo-Energie Suisse, which operates in the Bedretto Underground Lab. And a bit of a background on GES is that it was founded in 2010 and currently Peter Meyer is the CEO, and he was my boss when I worked at GS. GS is sponsored by a lot of Swiss regional electricity providers. In fact, all of them from each side of Switzerland, the French side, the German side, and the Italian side. And the main goal is to work with research institutions and industry to develop geothermal energy technology to enable an efficient worldwide exchange of experience and knowledge transfer, and to become the major provider for deep geothermal energy in Switzerland. Currently, there are no active geothermal producing sites. However, in the past, there were a few. I think most famously was the one in Basel, which you can see in the drill rig in the picture on the right. And this was a project that was in 2006 and unfortunately resulted in a series of small earthquakes, well, around 3.4 magnitude on the scale. And this caused quite a bit of a, let's say a bit of a hit to the Swiss geothermal energy industry, just because of the amount of press that happened as the geothermal site was in the main city, and it was something that led eventually to the closure of the project. And in my opinion, I think this really highlights the importance of public awareness and of course perception of geothermal energy when carrying out a project. So after this, really the goal of GS. I'll just go on to projects and progress first. So the goal of GS was to build off this induced seismicity and try to find methods that would reduce the microseismicity to safe levels. And I can go on to saying that the projects now, well, the current projects and the planned projects in Switzerland are shown in this map. And most of the projects are aimed in the Molasse Basin, which is underlain by a crystalline granite geology. The most recent project hopefully will be the Haute Sorna project in the Jura mountain range. And this will be a deep geothermal project once all the legal and political go ahead. And what I really like about this project is that this time there was a lot more community focus. In fact, there was a really creative way to explain how geothermal energy can be good and a benefit for the community through this sort of hot dry rock comic, which I think was really cool. And then now I can talk about a bit more about the actual recent induced seismicity research that the company carries out. So this is all happening in the Bedretto Lab, and as I said before, the major focus of GS now is to reduce induced seismicity. And I think back in December, there was an achievement where a series of multi-stage simulations were carried out without creating seismicity. In fact, this microseismicity induced by the stimulations was in the magnitude range -3.3 to -3.1, which is about 1 million times smaller than what happened in Basel in 2006. And also some of the research going on is an earthquake traffic light system, which is still being tested and further produced. Again, I'm not an expert in the induced seismicity area and the earthquake traffic light systems. You'd have to ask my colleagues who worked in the Bedretto Lab, mainly Peter Meyer, Franco Beltem, Ben Dyer, and Franz Ovetto. Yeah, but I think it's really cool and interesting. What I focused on is actually the reservoir characterization. and I was supervised by Dr. Remy Castillo. And the image on this, so the diagram on this slide is really nice because it shows a multi-pack system where you have the packers in dark gray that concentrate on a fault zone. And these systems, apart from the seismic characterizations, were able to collect all the data that I used for my reservoir characterization in my internship. And the goal of my internship was to work on the data from 3 boreholes, so that they could be applied to potential future boreholes that will be drilled at Bedretto. So yeah, so on the left you can see it's a sort of cross section. So the gray dot is the Bedretto Lab, and the lines coming out are the borehole trajectories. And I worked on 3 of these boreholes, and all the data that was gathered from here, I won't read them out, but there was a lot of data that I had to work with. And on the picture on the right is just a picture of me during my internship in the office, looking at these massive well catalogs, trying to figure out what I could do with them. So I had a range of methods that I used during my internship, and they ranged from applications that I learned during my master, but also I learned how to use quite a few different softwares such as WellCAD. And yeah, I will go on to the next slide, which shows like the types of data that I had. So the first one was flow meter data from spinner logs, which required analysis to produce the flow rates that I needed. There was hydraulic interval pressure time graph ratios that I calculated in order to attempt to quantify the hydraulic response between boreholes to see any relationships that were occurring. Another one is stereo-net analysis, and this was simply used for understanding the orientations of different types of structures and how they changed throughout the borehole to see how the structures interacted in Bedretto. And then P-wave velocity changes, which are mainly reductions to identify any larger fracture damage that was caused by vacancies in the borehole walls. I also looked at measurement whilst drilling data, and this actually turned into another project that I did as part of my internship too. And yeah, so as I said, my goal was to create a model of how potentially these boreholes were connected, and whether these connections apply to other boreholes too. And I was able to integrate quite a few data, and I did this by first integrating 2 sets of data, and then taking the fit that I found from 2 sets of data and adding that to other parts. For example, with the hydraulic pressure time responses, I sort of labeled them on this diagram, and then correlated them to the structure orientation locations and the flow rates calculated from well testing. It was quite a hard task just because of the sheer amounts of data that I had to use, and it was also not very straightforward because I found a lot of dead ends, and there were often data problems where I couldn't go forward. But when that happened, I could make suggestions to what data needed to be collected, along with my supervisor, who kind of advised me on how to move forward. And then actually the second part of my internship was based on drilling data methods, and this was quite interesting because I looked at the drilling progress from when the boreholes were drilled, and sort of did a back analysis with the wireline logging data to see how the drilling process could potentially identify fracture zones, or even fault zones, or even smaller fractures. And what I found was, using a sort of threshold system with drilling progress, I was able to find that, for example, in this sort of 3 area, you would have a fault zone with this type of drilling progress peak, which was above the threshold in this area, as is the one in 2. However, this is not a fault zone, or has not been identified as a fault zone, but we still see a response. So in this red box 1, however, this was not identified as anything because it was below the threshold value that I had distinguished for the region. And the conclusions for this was quite interesting, as a lot of the fault zones were actually identified correctly, but there were often some zones that were identified as fault zones but were not in reality. And the results of this, I will talk about in the conference in Germany later this year. And then I can just talk about my overall experience and the lessons I learned undertaking an internship during Corona times. So this was my first look into the industry, or the geothermal energy industry. Previously, I'd never had any experience, and it was a big learning curve, especially when you have to work. You go into the office, and a lot of people are not there because, of course, this happened during probably the worst time of COVID in November or December, and a lot of people were also working in the field. So really, I had to adapt to this, and I have like 3 major points that I wanted to stress on. So the first thing would be dealing with large data sets and having to clean them up. I think it might be obvious to some people, but when you have missing data, such as calibrations, I thought that, if I don't have these calibrations, I can't work out the specific parameters that I need to, and there's no way around that. But actually, you could look for other options, such as contacting the company and asking for calibrations that they possibly have. And in this case, they did. And in that way, I was able to calculate my parameters, the parameters I needed, with relative accuracy. And also, when looking at hydraulic data, especially, I learned to never actually take into account the absolute value. It's only really the magnitudes that you look at. And also, when you are working with really big data sets that all have different units, it is really important to make sure that you get your units right, because especially when you perhaps don't have a lot of experience in what type of ranges of data you're looking at, you can make a mistake and not have any idea that for example, your flow rate could be 5 magnitudes off, and then suddenly someone points it out, and it's kind of embarrassing. But yeah, it's just something that you learn, and it's quite difficult when you have a lot of data to work with. The second thing would be communication with colleagues, and I'm in a position where I was working with colleagues who spoke, of course, a range of languages apart from English. But when working in a foreign country, and especially in the field, a lot of the drilling operators will only speak German. And for me, when my German skills didn't extend to what they needed to be, I always had to, maintain, to ask my colleagues for help, and also to sort of collaborate with them to find answers and to help with the understanding of the overall problem. And another thing is sticking to deadlines. And this suddenly becomes a lot harder when you're not at university, because when you work on your own projects, you have to kind of set your own deadlines. And for example, if you're doing something and it doesn't turn out right, and then you have to do it again, this adds time to the initial timeline that you set, and you always have to manage and continually update something. It's not as if you have a project deadline and your lecturer would give you a set few weeks as a time span. You actually have to really manage things yourself, and I think hopefully I didn't do a bad job at that. And yeah, that's what I had to say for my experience at working in the Swiss geothermal energy industry. I'd like to say thank you for your attentions, and I'd like to acknowledge everyone who worked at GES for helping me out, especially my boss who gave me the opportunity to work with Bedretto Lab data, which is very recent and new geothermal energy industry research, and really making me strive to make the most out of my internship. Thank you.
Thank you, Simran. That talk was really insightful and honest as well, and I think it will really benefit a lot of our student members. It's really refreshing. Thank you. Firstly, I mean, how cool to be associated with an underground lab. It's something. It's like something from James Bond. It's so cool. But also all those skills you learn and picked up, they're so relevant to the industry and really making progress, and they will stand you in good stead for the rest of your career. I was particularly interested in the identifying the fractures from the drilling progress and then comparing that to the image logs, because if I'll compare that to what we're doing at the moment at the Eden project, we don't have any logs, we don't have any measurements while drilling, so those drilling parameters become really, really critical, and they are your parameters whilst drilling. So I thought that was particularly interesting, and I'm looking forward to hearing it in Germany about the results.
Yeah, it's like I think it's a good way, because especially when you don't have all the wireline logs and you really need something at the beginning to initially work out where your fault zones are. It really does help. And when I analyzed the data and kind of back analyzed it with the wireline logs, the accuracy was surprising. So yeah, that's it was in the Cellar Drilling Conference, if you've heard of it.
I haven't, but if you send me the link, I would. If it's online, I would love to hear. What you discovered with that, because it's very practical and useful for the sort of drilling that's going on at the moment.
Yeah, I agree.
Does anyone have any questions for Simran?
I was just going to echo what Lucy said. I think all of us can absolutely relate to many of the things you said, like sort of, oh, well, I've come up with X for the flow rate. I wonder if that's wrong by a factor of 1,000 or 1,000,000. You just don't know, do you? So yeah, a lot of those experiences, and yeah, so thanks very much for that. I had a question about I love the way you were using the drilling data and the ROP to see. I wonder if this is a real fracture zone or not. And I wondered whether you also had the chance to use any, or whether was it recorded any drilling loss data, because sometimes the rigs, they just have such big trip tanks, you have no idea what's going on. But sometimes they can use smaller trip tanks, you can start to see small changes, and that can be really useful if the data is collected carefully. But it depends all on the drillers, and I wonder whether, being this a lab experiment, maybe they did take quite a lot of care to try to get any data like that.
Yeah, actually that's a really good point. So the data I used was from 2 boreholes where the drilling data was really good. One borehole, the first one, the company, or the drilling company, is called Süblin AG, which is an Austrian company. They didn't collect the data in the best way, so there was actually data loss for one borehole, which unfortunately I couldn't use for my analysis. So even though I wasn't on site when the drilling occurred, it would definitely be something that needs to be considered, especially when you have drilling companies or external companies that do the drilling for the analysis. I think collaboration with them is really important, because that's one of the things when I was doing my internship, I was given data, and there were no units, there were hardly any labels for the data, and I ended up having to call them quite a few times to clarify if everything was correct. And it's just, yeah, the exchange between the scientists and the drillers often tends to be quite shaky. Yeah, but there was definitely those problems.
Yeah, I sympathize there with the loss data, because that is a critical piece of information that we need as geothermal geologists, and it often does get lost in the trip tanks, which is frustrating. Yes, any more questions?
Can I fling in a second one, Lucy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, which is because you showed some lovely, image analysis and sort of obviously quite a bit of work done on fractures and things. Was there a particular approach taken to fractures in terms of, because what appear as fractures on image logs may be open fractures, they may be cemented, and there's lots of stuff you can get into with all stress, the stress state, etc. And I wonder, is that something that were you given access to, and had people already done work on interpreting that already? Were they giving you a whole lot of interpreted data, or did they just say, hey, Simran, here's the raw data, do something with it?
Yeah, so actually, my supervisor, Dr. Remy Castilla, is a structural geologist, and I helped him out in the sort of orientation analysis. Maybe I can go back to one of. So yeah, sorry. This is the StereoNet diagram, and when I created these StereoNets, I was just able to identify just a few fractures or just slight changes in orientations, and see if they had an effect on the flow rate. And I relayed these results to my supervisor, and my supervisor actually was in charge and responsible of stress calculations, especially with borehole breakouts, to see sort of the locations and analyzing where they were. But to me, my task was not about creating a structural geological model and analyzing exactly how the fault system throughout the whole Rotondic one it worked. But I did definitely have a bit of a role in helping him with the orientations.
Great. And if I got the right impression, it looked like there were actually several packers used. So you actually had zonal testing, is that right? And I don't know if you can say any more about how discrete were the tests the zones that were tested?
Yeah, so the zones that were tested, if I remember correctly, some were really, really centered in, I'd say some were just about a meter wide, just to get the fault zone that we were looking at particularly. And for my analysis, I analyzed I think about 15 different packet intervals, and these were specifically done mainly just at the locations of the faults.
And out of interest, did the Geo Suisse, were they able to confirm with confidence that what you were testing was really what you thought you were testing? Because sometimes they can be concerned about, oh, I'm not sure if that packet actually sealed, so maybe this signal, because it looks awfully like the signal next the adjacent signal, are we actually testing two zones, though we think we're testing one? Was there any of those problems?
Yeah, so I was looking at, again, like the data between this CB1 borehole and ST2 borehole, which were quite close together. And so when I saw a response in one borehole that was quite large, often there would be a bit of an offset, and you would see a response that was possibly equally as large, but not always in the same in the next borehole. And that way you could create the links between. Just show you. This was done by my supervisor Remy Castilla previously, but here you can see the links where the same fault zones traveled through. And it was like, what I tried to do is to find if there were any other parameters such as electrical conductivity changes that related to these that had the same changes in each borehole, again, which was a bit difficult to do, but there were a few. Like I could see here, like there was a large electrical conductivity increase at the T8 interval, and the same was noted in the HT12 interval in the adjacent borehole. So in this was like what I was looking at when it came to cross relationships.
Can you remind me what the well separation was between the ST2 well and MB1 well?
Yeah, they were very close. I think in some regions they were less than 10 meters apart. Okay. Yeah, but again, like it's been a while since I was at the company.
No, yeah. So it's really interesting. I had another question, just a general one about the Haute-Saône project. Do you know, because you said it was a deep geothermal project, are they targeting a major fault, or are they looking to hydraulically stimulate the reservoir once they drill the wells?
So as far as I know, they haven't actually been able to drill anything at the moment, so they don't know about what faults they will be targeting. Right, okay. There probably are fault zones that they would target, but I know that there is an underground lab in proximity to the Haute-Saône location, which is called the Monterrey Underground Lab. And I'm not exactly sure about the geology or the fracture, the fault geology in the lab, but I know that they would use initial studies from there to work on the Haute-Saône project, but that still has to be done, a lot of the geological analysis.
It's great to have those sort of facilities to test the subsurface before you start drilling. Very envious.
Yeah. I think with topology, it really allows for it. You just have these mountains and ranges where you can just drill horizontally and get everything.
It's amazing. Does anyone have any further questions? I have one left. No? Okay. Well, to finish then, my last question. Oh, yeah. Hello.
Lucy. Sorry, this is Ben. I was a colleague with Simran in the autumn, and she was doing her internship. So I think, first of all, it's just to echo that it was a difficult time to be doing the internship. Those of us that weren't in the field were not in the office, so I think she did extremely well to be able to keep focused and keep working with not enough colleagues around her, really. So well done, Simran. Thank you. I just think one little comment on Haute-Saône. I think to be clear is that we as GES wouldn't target faults. That's not what we do. We rather the reverse, try to avoid them. So I think that's a distinction probably between the GES approach and the approaches here in Cornwall.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Thank you for clarifying that. That's good.
Thanks.
Okay.
Well, my last question is, what's next? Once you've done, yeah, what's your next endeavour in the geothermal world?
So thanks for asking. So that was a cool thing. I'm working on fracture topology sort of patterns and understanding how permeability decays with a function of distance from a fault zone, as this permeability is quite an important parameter in the geothermal energy industry. And I look at topological methods as opposed to geometrical methods of structure analysis, and it's quite a new sort of field in geology. I think Sanderson from Southampton University, he developed quite a few of these techniques and got the ideas running, and I really work off that, along with hydrological data from the Bedretto Underground Lab, along with my supervisor, Dr. Bernard Brixel. And that's what I'm working on now, and I won't be done until the end of September. And hopefully after that, I will pursue a career in geothermal energy and related fields. It's so open for me. But I did really enjoy it.
That's great. Well, best of luck with your study until the end of September. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about your internship. It was really interesting.
Thank you. It was really nice to present for everyone today.
Thank you. Could I ask the committee members of WING to stay on if the others are happy to leave?